Welcome back to Mr. Twilight channel, a place where we share terrifying, chilling, yet captivating horror stories together. Today's theme is 3 true horror cabin stories, as told by those who experienced them. Whether you believe them or not, these encounters have been recorded and passed down by word of mouth for many years. Are they real, or just illusions born from human fear? Let's listen and find out together. Are you ready? Let's begin. This is the story of Joseph Brown, an American writer. Joseph once shared his terrifying experience in an old cabin deep in the mountains of Colorado, USA. Joseph was an adventurous soul, always traveling to remote places to seek inspiration for his writing. In 2018, he decided to rent an isolated mountain cabin to focus on his next book. It was an old wooden house, hidden in the middle of a pine forest. There was no exact address, only a few photos and handwritten directions like, drive through the forest road for about 20 minutes, turn left at the big rock, then go straight. At the time, Joseph thought this place was perfect, offering exactly what he wanted: absolute silence. Ignoring the eerie surroundings, he contacted the cabin owner, who warned him, "This place is deep in the woods. Be careful of wild animals and don't wander around at night." This only fueled Joseph's curiosity even more. He arrived in the late afternoon, when the air had turned cool. The cabin looked small, its wooden walls faded, the old roof weathered, and the front yard covered with pine needles. The owner had left the key in a metal box attached to the door. Everything around him was deathly quiet, broken only by the sound of the wind rustling through the trees and the chirping of insects. Inside, the cabin was simply furnished: a small kitchen, a living room connected to the bedroom, and in the right-hand corner, a wooden desk and an old armchair. At first, Joseph was thrilled by the rustic atmosphere, exactly the kind of environment he needed for writing. He spent his first evening cleaning up. There was no internet here, and phone signal was weak. But Joseph didn't care. His goal was to escape the noisy world and focus on his book. Still, he couldn't shake off the strange feeling that someone was watching him through the window. Every time he looked back, he saw only the dark, dense pine forest and the shadows swallowed by the night. Nothing unusual, but deep down, his instincts told him something was lurking out there, watching him. After a few days, Joseph realized the cabin wasn't as quiet as he thought. At night, while writing, he heard strange sounds like claws scratching against wood or heavy footsteps outside the porch. Yet, every time he checked, there was nothing. One night, at 2 a.m., he was startled awake by a steady knocking sound. Knock, knock, knock. What made his hair stand on end was that the door wasn't shaking. The sound seemed to come from inside the wall itself. He turned on all the lights, checking every corner, but found nothing. Probably just mice or a wild animal scratching the wall, he told himself. But instead of calming down, his fear grew, because deep down he knew that sound didn't belong to a small creature. The most horrifying moment came when Joseph saw footprints on the wooden floor of the living room one morning. The prints were large and oddly shaped. He couldn't tell if they belonged to a human or an animal. Before he could take a picture, the prints seemed to fade, then disappeared completely. Another night, while working on his laptop near the window, he heard heavy footsteps circling the cabin. Fearing an intruder, he turned off the lights and quietly moved toward the window to observe. Holding his breath, he waited for another sound. Then he glanced at a large mirror hanging on the wall, and what he saw froze his blood. Instead of his own reflection, he saw a girl standing behind him. She wore a white dress, her hair hanging loosely. Joseph spun around in horror, but there was no one there. Yet, when he looked back at the mirror, the girl's shadowy figure still lingered. His heart pounded wildly, his limbs weak. He couldn't believe his eyes. Was this just stress-induced hallucination, or was it truly something supernatural? Suddenly, the image of the girl vanished. Joseph collapsed to the floor, his mind blank. He decided he wouldn't sleep that night instead. He stayed up with a flashlight, waiting for dawn. And from this moment on, his nightmare in the cabin truly began. After a series of bizarre events, Joseph desperately wanted to leave, but his curiosity and stubbornness made him think, just one more night. I only need to finish the climax of my novel, then I'll leave. That night, a violent storm struck. The wind howled fiercely, and rain poured down in torrents. Lightning flashed across the window, making the outside world look even more haunting. Near midnight, as Joseph sat huddled on the bed, he noticed a faint light coming from the corner of the living room, even though the power had been cut due to the storm. A blurry figure appeared, the mysterious girl once again. This time, her face was clearer, her pale lips moving as if trying to say something. A faint whisper echoed hard to distinguish. "Run. If you don't, you won't escape me." At the same time, outside the window, through a flash of lightning, Joseph caught sight of a towering creature. Its face was hidden in the shadows, but its eyes glowed like two blue flames. The wind howled, and Joseph heard a low, angry growl like a wild beast. Panicking, he scrambled for something to defend himself. The front door began to shake violently, as if something was trying to break in. He managed to wedge a wooden chair against the door, clutching a kitchen knife in his trembling hands. The door shook again and again. At that moment, Joseph realized the meaning of the girl's warning. He had to run, or else. Summoning all his courage, he opened the back door and dashed out into the pouring rain. He ran without daring to look back. Through the storm, he jumped into his Jeep, jammed the key into the ignition, and sped off down the muddy road, praying that the monstrous creature wasn't following him. After what felt like an eternity, he finally reached a roadside diner a few miles away on the highway. The next morning, Joseph returned to the cabin with the police, but everything seemed untouched. The door was still locked, the furniture intact. Most shockingly, the mirror where he saw the girl had vanished, as if it had never existed. The cabin owner was baffled. "I've never placed any mirror in that cabin." Traumatized and terrified, Joseph swore never to return to that area again. What happened in that gloomy cabin in the Colorado pine forest haunted him for the rest of his life. Whether people believe his story or think it was just his imagination, Joseph himself claimed the experience was more horrifying than anything he had ever written in his horror novels. The Ghost of Maine, and narrated in third-person storytelling style. This story happened in the state of Maine, in the northeastern part of the United States, a land of endless forests, and also the setting of many horror stories written by the famous author Stephen King. The one who told this story was a woman named Marianne. Marianne was born and raised in Portland, a peaceful coastal city. She worked as a primary school teacher, living a life that was quiet, even boring. So, in the summer of 2020, she decided to invite her younger sister, Cassidy, to go on a relaxing vacation. They chose to stay at a small wooden cabin by Moosehead Lake, a beautiful place surrounded by maple forests, with clear water and a sky full of stars at night. The cabin stood isolated. To get there, they had to drive through a long forest road, but for the two sisters, that only made the trip feel more special. They arrived at the cabin early in the morning. The place looked cozy, painted pale yellow, with a wooden porch and a few rocking chairs swaying gently in the breeze. Everything seemed perfect until Cassidy discovered something strange. While unpacking, she opened the drawer of the bedside table, and inside, she found a small wooden talisman carved with mysterious symbols. On the back of it were strange runic letters she couldn't read. Feeling uneasy, Cassidy showed the talisman to her sister. Marianne had a bad feeling about it. After a brief discussion, they decided to put the talisman back where they found it, closing the drawer carefully. But that night, Cassidy began to have strange dreams. She dreamed of a shadowy figure standing outside the bedroom window, holding the talisman and whispering incomprehensible words. The next morning, Cassidy didn't tell Marianne. She thought it was just a nightmare. On the second night, around 1 or 2 a.m., both sisters were startled awake by the sound of loud knocking at the door. They hurried to open it, but there was no one outside, only the sound of the wind howling through the trees. At first, they thought it might have been branches hitting the roof or maybe a prank by some tourist. But when they checked the doorknob, they found it damp as if someone had just touched it. The next morning, the sky turned gloomy as Marianne stepped outside to get some fresh air. Her heart nearly stopped. On the window glass were smeared handprints, dozens of them layered on top of each other. From that moment on, a terrible thought haunted her mind. Could this cabin have been the site of some ancient ritual? On the third night, the power suddenly went out. Darkness swallowed the entire forest. Marianne and Cassidy lit candles to calm themselves, but the air inside the cabin grew cold, unnaturally cold for a summer night. At around 11 p.m., they heard a long, mournful howl echoing from the lake, mixed with a sound like someone weeping. Cassidy, driven by curiosity, grabbed a flashlight and persuaded Marianne to check it out. They stepped cautiously toward the lakeshore, their flashlight beams sweeping over the still water. For a while, there was nothing, but then Cassidy screamed. A pale figure slowly rose from the water. It was a woman. Her long hair hung down, her wet clothes clinging to her thin body. As the flashlight hit her, the woman turned. Her face was twisted, deformed. Without waiting to see what would happen next, the sisters turned and fled, slamming the cabin door shut behind them. They were certain of one thing: they had just seen a ghost. Marianne wanted to leave immediately, but driving through the dark forest in the pouring rain was too dangerous. They had no choice but to wait until morning. At dawn, Cassidy's phone finally picked up a signal. She quickly called a friend named Marcus, a local who knew the area well. Upon hearing their story, Marcus was deeply concerned. He told them of an old rumor that long ago, a sorcerer had performed dark rituals in a forest cabin near Moosehead Lake. Sacrifices were made to dark forces, and the cabin was later abandoned. Years later, someone renovated it and rented it out, unaware of its dark history. Marcus believed the wooden talisman they found was a seal, a protective charm used to lock away spirits or evil forces. Moving it or disturbing it might break the seal, allowing something dark to return. Terrified, the sisters quickly packed their belongings and prepared to leave. But when they opened the drawer, the talisman was gone. They clearly remembered closing the drawer, but now it had vanished. As Marianne locked the front door, she glanced at the corner of the room and froze. The talisman lay on the floor, broken in two. Before she could react, something cold brushed past her back, sending chills down her spine. Marianne screamed, running straight to the car. As they drove away, Cassidy glanced in the rearview mirror and saw a white shadow gliding from the cabin porch, chasing after them. Luckily, the car sped away just in time, leaving behind only echo of ghostly wails in the dark forest. When they reached town, the sisters told their story, shaken and exhausted. An old woman who overheard them whispered, "You too should be grateful you're still alive. That cabin is cursed." Months later, news broke that the cabin had been banned from being rented out after many other guests reported strange occurrences. No one could confirm the truth, but for Marianne and Cassidy, their experience at the haunted cabin by Moosehead Lake would haunt them forever. And somewhere out there along the lonely lakeshore, something still waits in the dark, something that doesn't belong to this world. This final story comes from the United Kingdom. It was told by a group of 4 young friends: Tom, Lucy, Harry, and Jenna, who shared a passion for camping and adventure. Their destination this time was the Snowdonia mountain range, a famous spot for hikers and nature lovers. But behind its majestic beauty, Snowdonia was said to hide dark corners, places marked by supernatural mysteries. That weekend, the group packed their tents and gear, ready for a night of camping high up in the mountains. But the weather turned without warning. Rain poured, wind roared, and thick fog engulfed the forest. Rather than risk sleeping in the storm, they decided to find shelter for the night. By chance, they came across an old local man who pointed them toward an abandoned cabin about 3 miles away, hidden behind a cluster of pine trees. "If you don't mind roughing it, you can stay there until the rain passes," the old man said. Climbing up the hillside, the group eventually found the cabin. Just as the old man described, it was ancient, covered in moss, with cracked windows and rotting wood. They hesitated at first, but with the rain falling harder and darkness closing in, they had little choice but to step inside. Inside, the floorboards were damp and moldy. In one corner stood an old wooden table, its surface itched with strange ancient writing. Tom tried searching for clues on his phone, but the signal was too weak. On the walls were strange symbols: a 5-pointed star, interlocked triangles, marks that looked like they belonged to some kind of occult ritual. Lucy, who had a fascination with the mysterious, whispered, "Maybe this place once belonged to a sorcerer or someone who practiced ancient magic." They huddled together under blankets, forming a circle in the center of the cabin, doing their best to forget the eerie atmosphere around them. Outside, the wind howled through the cracks in the cabin walls, its sound thin and ghostly. Harry, unable to sleep, decided to step outside to relieve himself. But as soon as he left the cabin, he froze in place. Far off in the mist there was a flickering light. "Hello, is anyone there?" Harry called, but the only response was a faint, dying whisper drifting through the fog. "Help, May." Terrified, Harry rushed back inside and called the others. Uneasy and shaken, they returned to the cabin. Jenna, the one most frightened by ghost stories, whispered nervously, "Don't want to stay here. I feel like something is really wrong." But in the middle of the night, they had no choice. Around 3 a.m., Jenna was startled awake by a scratching sound like claws dragging across wood. She quickly woke everyone. Tom crept to the window and gently pulled back the tattered curtain. Through the dim moonlight, he saw a tall, lanky figure standing between the trees, its head shaped like a deer's skull with large antlers. Tom's eyes widened in horror. Lucy whispered, What is that?" Before Tom could answer, a terrifying scream echoed through the forest, sending chills down their spines. The figure vanished instantly. The cabin door began shaking violently, as if something was trying to force its way in. Harry and Tom threw their weight against the door, holding it shut. Jenna cried out, "We need to get out of here." But outside, the fog was thick, the rain still pouring. As dawn approached and the storm finally eased, Jenna pointed to the ceiling. "Look there." Etched into the wooden beams above them was the image of a horned demon baring its fangs in a menacing grin. The group suddenly realized whatever this place was, it was tied to some ancient dark legend of demons that haunted these mountains. Lucy guessed that the cabin might have been a site for sacrificial rituals or dark summoning ceremonies long ago. Despite wanting to flee immediately, they had to wait for the weather to clear completely. With only an old map and the risk of getting lost in the fog, they decided to stay until nightfall, sitting close together, ready for anything. Sure enough, when night returned, the strange sounds came with it. A chilling wind blasted through the cabin, making them scream in terror. Harry grabbed a wooden stick. Tom raised his survival knife, ready to fight if they had to. Then through the window, a massive deer skull loomed into view. Its glowing eyes stared at them. The creature growled, extending long, grotesque arms toward them, reaching inside the cabin. Harry swung his stick with all his might, striking the arm. A horrifying screech of pain echoed through the cabin, and the creature withdrew into the darkness. There was no other option The friends burst through the door, sprinting through the forest as fast as their legs could carry them. Branches whipped against their faces, but fear drove them forward. Behind them, the creature's ghastly roar echoed through the trees as if it was chasing them. Lucy stumbled repeatedly, nearly giving up, but Tom pulled her to her feet, shouting, "Run! Don't stop!" After nearly an hour of struggling through the forest, the group finally reached a small village. Soaked and traumatized, the four friends had survived, but they would never forget the terror of that night. The next morning, they left Snowdonia without daring to look back. Rumors later spread that local authorities had demolished the cabin, though no official record confirmed it. All that was certain was this: what they experienced was terrifyingly real and far more horrifying than any ghost story or horror movie could ever be. Fear is instinctive, a part of human nature, and when faced with phenomena beyond understanding, people easily become small, helpless, and overwhelmed by panic. Many believe that isolated cabins are often tied to supernatural events, partly because of their remote, secluded setting, and partly because their history may hide bloody pasts or dark rituals long forgotten. Of course, there's always the possibility that these are just stories born from imagination or psychological obsession, the mind playing tricks in the silence of the night. In the end, whether you believe it or not is entirely your choice. After all, this world still holds countless mysteries beyond explanation. If you're still curious and want to hear more real horror experiences, don't forget to visit my channel and share your thoughts. Mr. Twilight Channel, wishing you a peaceful night's sleep. If you can, ghostly laughter echoes